From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. Hey, James, how are you today? I'm glad that we're back and looking forward to this episode.
Great to be back. I think this conversation will be lively like our last episode. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well. I'm going to do better if I can pronounce our guest's last name, and I'm going to try that really hard right now. And it is Marc Cholewczynski. Did I get it?
You got it. You nailed
All
it.
right. I made up for my first episode. If you didn't tune in, Marc was on our previous episode where you got to learn about his background, his start in AV, and a really great journey that he's had. But welcome back, Marc. Marc's one of the hosts of AV Superfriends, and we're glad to have him for another episode.
Thanks for having me back, guys. I really enjoyed that first one, and so hopefully we can elaborate further and dive deeper down that rabbit hole.
Sure will. Sure will. So one of the things you touched on the last episode, which I really like, is standards, standardization, how you can use programming and your approach to programming to really simplify things. I think what we've learned about AV, and we've also learned about trying to manage multiple rooms and multiple systems, is the more you have one-offs, the harder it is to do. So that's my take on it. I've done a lot in this area, and it's something that, as somebody who is involved in a programming company, we really believe in, and we try to promote to clients. But Marc, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've done and how it's benefited you?
Yeah. So standards, I think, are critical when we start talking about at scale. I think you nailed it, Steve. Like, if you're trying to manage an army of one-offs, you're going to be pulling your hair out, like, no matter what you're doing. And I work a lot on standards for like the hardware side, but also standards around the UI side, and kind of what my vision of that really would be. I'm trying to simplify, and make as elegant as I possibly can from that kit of parts, right? And so if I can get to a world where I have limited things on my shelf that I have to worry about, if I can go to a much simplified hardware set and then allow that to align and be reconfigured however I want to design that through that to meet the needs of space, that's my goal, right? To not have random bespoke custom black secret boxes out there doing weird things. But what does that mean from like the UI side, right? And the programming side. And I think there's a little bit of a journey here that a lot of folks may kind of agree with, or maybe they won't. But as we kind of moved in from, switchers and things like that, of all these, random secret black boxes out there doing things, we all had this kind of culture. We knew there was kind of this unspoken rule, like we knew where computers plugged in. We knew where the document camera plugged in. We knew where the laptop stuff kind of plugged in. And as our group, we kind of carried those things. We had it kind of documented, but that also fell into our programming, right? So we kind of had things that kind of laid out in this very specific way. And it happened kind of how we deployed them through our classrooms over the years. So it was interesting to look back at our standard that we have from programming, and if we're doing kind of interlocking and things like that, where you can see how we adopted technologies in rooms, because they kind of came in that order, and it still sits there today, because that's, we still use those templates to move forward. But it became more critical to the storytelling piece. And we started talking about this a little bit before, in that our administration changed, and they had this new fixation. They really wanted to be hyper aware of like what everything's being done, teaching, learning, and lab spaces. And they wanted to know how much, computers are being used, documents are being used, laptops being used, how long systems are being used for, what are the hours, and so now we started asking all these questions. So what did that mean, and how could we deliver that information with what we had? We knew we had the data, but we had to make sure all of our naming was really clean. All of our numbers were really clean in a really chronological order, and that we didn't have drift, because rolling that up, we're using Fusion primarily on campus, we have for years, but it becomes really, really important. And so you don't have dirty data, right? So we want to make sure we have clean, aligned data that can tell that story really well. And it really starts right all the way back to the very first point of contact on whatever your UI is. Is it the right number? Is it the right name? Right? Because you're going to be held accountable for that all the way through, all the way up to your admin. And if you have these weird things that show up in that report, that you're going to get asked. And a lot of the standardized pieces I'll do is about, how do I reduce the inquiry back to us about like, well, can you clarify what this is, or can you clarify what that is, so that we're not having to have this these constant conversations from admin about what, can you tell me more about this data or that data. So we became hypercritical on making sure all of our stuff was named and numbered very cleanly based on spreadsheets that we developed years ago, and we still carry that. And it's kind of one of those things that I don't know if most people that kind of tiptoe into programming ever even have their mind on that piece. Like, what does this mean to like the larger level of campus or organization? Most people are kind of looking at like what's just directly in front of them, this classroom, this conference room, whatever it is. But understanding that's part of a larger organization, one for support, it ties into our support desk. Those links all had to be accurate, named the same way. They're looking at us, our admin, our money comes from there. Our story has to be told. So they want to know, and whatever we can do to tell that as clean as we possibly can becomes all based on that standard, right? If I had a bunch of one-offs, I could never tell that story in any linear way. It would just be, I have an army of random things out there and they're all doing who knows what. And so we became really aware to make sure that wherever we can, make sure that a standard approach has been adopted and deployed.
Have you ever been able to measure and quantify the benefit that you've gotten from that? Because I think that would be really powerful.
We know a lot about usage. We know a lot about when things are popular being used, and we can also forecast trends that we see in BYOD, things like that. And I think that's been really important because it is directly tied to how we're funded, right? And that the classic example everybody goes, oh, we're using DVD players, right? Well, we were able to show like, no, we're not. We're not using DVD players. And that was a really easy set of numbers to give. So we collapsed, it's gone. It's no longer in a classroom. We don't need it. So those types of things are really critical, but now we're starting to think a little bit differently, and it's not necessarily just sources. With new tool sets, we're starting to get smarter locations. So now we can start to see like what's going on in the room at large. We have a project here called the Geometry of Learning, and we're actually starting to see how technology is deployed in space with the room to see where that correlates to grades, right? So now we're talking about technology accessibility to students in the classroom, to faculty, as it correlates directly to the outcomes of teaching and learning. And so all of our systems are kind of building in that direction. So they all have to communicate and aggregate the data from programming to endpoints being managed the same way, that we're all moving that data so that we can know that what we're doing is one, benefiting students and not being a detriment to teaching and learning, right? And so it's kind of realignment and kind of honing everybody to move in the same direction together to tell that story. And it can be simple things too. It can be just like seating, right? Or lighting controls, but everything is data now. The students in the room are data, not necessarily what's on their devices, but themselves. The sensing capabilities that exist in space, their cameras and things like that, counting. So the data set's much larger than just kind of what's chosen to be used in a space now. It's the rooms themselves are kind of alive in our machines that are aggregating larger data. So it's a much larger conversation than it once was.
I'd love to hear that. And I know I'm going to have James jump in on this. We often talk about how everything underlying is programming, and this is a good example of where programming not only can make a room work and is a necessary part of it, but adds all that value. If it wasn't for programming, you wouldn't be able to have these types of things. How do we make more people aware of that, James?
Conversations like this, having folks like Mark who brought very good points in this conversation here, reaching out to our contacts and showing the value that programming brings and how important we can build on it. Like, if Mark wasn't able to provide data, valuable data to the institution, they couldn't do what they're doing. They can't move things forward. And you can't just provide data to provide data. It has to be valuable data you can understand. So I think what Mark is doing is excellent and refreshing to hear from that, especially in the AV world, because we know standards in AV is pick the one you want to go with. everyone has their own, and it has been a pet peeve of mine from day one with AV. So it's refreshing to hear others starting to get on his standard bandwagon. I have not done what Mark done yet, but back when I was programming in AMX, I in my mind I had a standard of, okay, this is what my touch panel was. This was what, like, all I had those standards. Nothing was formally written, but again, I was the only real programmer on staff. Here, I haven't developed that standard yet, but I'm thinking I might steal this from Mark.
And it's really critical to kind of adopt like the best you can at large, right? And so when we think about what we do in teaching and learning space, it's empathy primarily, right? And so if you have a room full of 400 students there, and that instructor shows up, it needs to be like super intuitive how to operate that system, right? They may or may not have showed up in advance to do it, but what they're doing is the brand of that university. If they're up there fumbling around, having to do tricks and all these widgets and all that crap, the students know, right? They know where their money is going. They're transient. They can vote with their dollars and their feet. They're going to go. So what you're doing programmatically to deliver an elegant experience for that instructor to do what they do best without having to like have a secret code and all these weird things and bespoke training things to learn how your nomenclature, it needs to be very intuitive and very easy. And you're tied directly to that mission of that campus, right? And so, from a programming standpoint, if you have something that works, it works well, why reinvent it? Document it, get it standardized, bake it in, deploy it so you can train around it and build documentation around it so that you can better support everybody, right? And so, and it all starts with just being intentional, right? And understanding that we're all there trying to meet the needs of that organization.
One of the questions that I'm sure comes up and that I know that I've faced is that when you're developing something like this, I'm sure you're trying to think big picture, you're trying to think about all the what if scenarios, but planning for change and flexibility is critical. How have you done that, and what's been maybe some of the experiences that you've had?
We've talked about that kind of even, where can we expand in this design, in this development for the programming, right? Do we have the ability to easily add? And working with Jason, my programmer here, a lot of times when we know a room is capable of doing a lot of different things, we will intentionally put some hooks in our programming, even from the button panel or touch panel and a logo, an icon, a button. We'll have them there, but we'll suppress those up front, right? And so, but we know the backend is there. If we know we can add a source or two sources or whatever it may be, if it's highly likely, or we're going to add a camera or whatever that may be, we'll adopt that standard kit. We'll put it in there, but we just won't have it enabled at the UI level yet, right? And so acknowledging that change is going to happen and people are going to ask for new feature sets. So kind of baking some of that into your standard approach and saying, okay, this is where I know I can add sources really easy, or I can add an output, or I can add, a camera and some presets, and, maybe I want additional audio control. Know what those things are and kind of as modules. So we've gotten to the point where here's our audio folder, boom, take the audio folder, drop it in. Here's our camera folder, put the camera folder in there. And then you're kind of just adding those pieces. We've kind of made it so we're kind of stitch those pieces back together, and not to take anything away from a programmer, but we all will like copy and paste and steal our own stuff. So why reinvent this wheel every time we go about it? So any way you can find that efficiency, because it's the paper trail. It's kind of the reference in just knowing that you need to be able to expand it. So be intentional and make it so that you're not backing yourself into a corner when that time does come.
That's exactly, I think that's a great point, because I say that often, is that we have to design our systems and we have to design our approach so that making one little seemingly small change doesn't blow it all up, because nobody quite understands what that is when if you get yourself backed into a corner, as you mentioned. James, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this in terms of the are we talking now about maybe having some people that build standards and other people who deploy them? Are we looking at more specialties in terms of programming, where you can look at a senior programmer, let's say, who is building these the model, and the junior programmer who's just setting it all up and putting it in the field? Is that something that you think is feasible?
Is it something that's feasible? Yes, I do think it's feasible. Am I seeing it? I don't think I'm seeing it as much as we should be seeing. Because I mean, sounds like Mark might have one other programmer on his staff. Currently, right now, I'm the only programmer on my staff. I'm not even programming. I know a lot of schools, they tend to only have one person who is doing the whole work. So having that, okay, we're setting the standard and everyone else is following through is it's really they're setting their own standard and then it's all housekeeping on them to make sure that they're following through on it. So I don't know if I'm actually seeing it, but hopefully we will.
I think here, all of our basic technicians will go through level one, right? And that just so that we can kind of go and touch back on that empathy thing, they understand what's going on, right? And so, if there's a problem somewhere, and it may be perceived that, oh, it's programmatically not doing this, they can double check that, right? And it's easy to say, oh, it's a programming thing, but if it's hardware, it's layer one, they should understand what it means to troubleshoot that back and say, no, this is not a programming thing. Programming is fine. Turns out it's just this or a cabling thing. But it also acts as kind of like that Rosetta Stone. Everybody knows the language. Everybody knows how these things are communicating. And they all have a little bit of programming chops they can do, so that if nothing else, they don't use that, oh, it's a programming problem, get out of jail free card. Like, no, like you need to go and make sure like that it's not a programming problem, because the odds are it's probably not. And then, then we can come back around and then they understand how to take that, if it is a programming issue, identify it and start having that communication. We always hear about, oh, it's AV and IT people, but within the AV itself, the programming to like technician language is really important too. So we all are referencing and using the same dialogue. And I think that goes into it. Making sure that everybody has at least some understanding of how all of our systems are communicating is really important.
It sounds to me like you're building a lot of confidence in your model and your solution, so that when it is being used, it should work a certain way, and if it's been tested that way in the past, it should continue to work, so that, like you said, you're not pointing fingers, rather ruling out what the variables could be.
Absolutely. And as everything becomes more and more converged, that language becomes really critical. All the trainings and all the overlapping capabilities become really, really important, just so that we are all functioning as a team and we don't have kind of blind spots in our organization, and everything is at least transparent.
So $1 million question, and we'll use this as to wrap up with, is why aren't more people doing this? Why is this why is this something that to me it seems obvious, but why do more people not do it?
I think it's probably a bit intimidating for folks to know where to start, right? And you're talking about building a team, showing building knowledge and building confidence, but it also starts at the leadership level of our organizations. Are they asking the right questions? Is the AV piece of what we do part of the larger mission, or is it more just mechanical and just part of a utility? And it kind of pick your leaders wisely in your organizations so that they understand and be a part of the data story, because I think that's where it all comes from, is that we're all tied to kind of the mission and vision of our organizations. But start, right? If you don't see your organization, you're doing these steps and kind of taking this on and do it, that should be like your opportunity to take some action. What can you do? What can you do for your professional development to learn more? If you want to do more programming or have at least more awareness, like there's easy ways to go get exposure to some pieces. Learn the language, and then build some confidence within ourselves. Like be that change you want to see. And if you want to start doing more of these things, like go after them and start building your organization and take people with you along the journey. Don't do it all by yourself.
I think Mark brought up some good points there. I will also add, I think he's missing a key element here is I also think part of our problem is the AV industry as a whole. We don't have true standards. Everyone has their own way of doing things. And so, I mean, they come from the IT world. And I use this example a lot. I know it's not programming, but if I take a Cat 5e cable, it doesn't matter what manufacturer I get that from, it's all the same color 8 pairs. But I got thrown into AV. I started working on XR. I take my first cable, I cut it open. I go, oh, red, white, and black. I find my hot, my common, my transmit. Great. Take the next cable, open up, blue, brown, yellow. What the hell?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there is no standard. So, if as an industry as a whole, if we can't do simple things to standardize our colors of our cables, what do we expect, like our communication between equipment or our programming or even the higher level things to be standardized? That's my pet peeve that I'll step off my soapbox now because I've been talking about from day one.
No, it's everything, right? And that's always joke. Oh, we have 10 standards. Oh, there's a new one, right? So, but you got to start, right? You got to, and I think it really starts at the infrastructure. We focus a lot of our staff development now just on OSI, right? Just the model, so that we can all understand, because that OSI is going to start to inform you like who delivers service on your campus and your organization. You know, the adage I use is data at rest, data in motion. Every time that data is moving, it's somebody's job. Whose job, right? And so, and kind of moving your staff to think more digitally, you know, whether it be from a button or a touch panel design, all the way through up to the reporting from our admin that yes, we had, 85% success in our teaching and learning spaces with grades this year. Do we know why? Do you know that data story, right? And that we are part of that. And where we can use standards and adopt, the better off we're all going to be.
And I'll just throw in that I think that if we look at what is the compromise or the happy medium, is that a standard doesn't have to be perfect and a standard doesn't have to be all encompassing, as long as we all commit to it and I think and stay consistent. I think that to me is what I've seen, where if we're going to do it this time and not the next time, then all of a sudden it's not going to be effective. But if we're investing in it, I think that's where we're going to see the return.
Absolutely. And for us, it is really tied to the success of the students, but also the success of our students who are supporting those spaces, right? That was probably one of the most critical pieces of why we need standardization, is just so that we could have a support desk that is actually functioning and it's not just the help desk for campus at large, but the presentation support desk that we've built around in that culture, having common approaches so that our students who staff that know what it is they're assisting with. We can tell them like, here's how it's configured, here's how it's programmed, here's how it's put together. Again, going back to having 500 random one-offs out there, that support desk would fall apart immediately.
Absolutely. And just maintenance and upgrading would just be astronomical, the effort involved. Well, this is a great place for us to stop, Mark. Thanks for being with us. And if you didn't catch the previous episode 150, you can get a little bit of Mark's background from Oregon State University. But Mark, thank you again. How can people get in touch with you, learn what you're up to, learn more about the AV Superfriends podcast, and anything else that you wanted to promote?
Yeah, you can catch AV Superfriends on pretty much every platform you're digesting podcasts on. You can go to avsuperfriends.com, check us out there. If you want to correspond and send us any emails or questions, you want to come on our show, feel free to drop us a line there. You can catch me on X at AV Diplomat as well. I do chime in from time to time, or LinkedIn. Marc Cholewczynski. It's just like it's pronounced, so just jam a bunch of letters in there. It'll come up at some point. And you can search me out on the Googles. I will pop up somewhere. If you get close, it'll be there. But yeah, listen to the show, and I'm glad I was on your guys' show. It's a good time.
Yeah, appreciate you being here, and we look forward to having you on again. James, how can people get in touch with you, learn what you're up to, and get any final thoughts that you have?
For final thoughts, this was another great episode with Mark, and glad he was able to join us. And again, you can Google me, you'll find me. I'm out there. Ensing Hepma, AV James King on X, LinkedIn. Again, I'm out there. You'll find me.
And for me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. My company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. And as James said, please check out our show and let us know what you think, and send us a comment and a review. And love to get your feedback and learn more about what you want to hear. So please reach out to us at AV Programmer Pod on Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter. And you can catch the show on your favorite podcast player as well as on YouTube. And that's what we have for today. And this has been Ask the Programmer.